Why are so many intelligent people quietly walking away from religion? Not in anger, not in protest, but in a kind of silent, private awakening. It's a question that unsettles many, because if religious faith is the highest form of truth, why is it that those most trained to seek truth, scientists, philosophers, educators, so often let it go? This isn't about arrogance. It's about a deep internal shift that begins with a question, one that faith often discourages. What if this isn't true? In this video, we'll explore the real reasons behind this quiet exodus, from the psychological forces that shape belief, to the historical cracks in sacred texts, to the emotional maturity it takes to walk away from something you once called absolute. If you've noticed this pattern in yourself or your community, or if you're still wrestling with it, stay with us. The answers are not always comfortable, but they are honest. Intelligence versus indoctrination, asking the forbidden questions. It doesn't start with a declaration. It starts with a question, a quiet one. Why would a loving God allow this? Why does this passage contradict the last? How do we know this is true? For many intelligent people raised within religion, these questions come early. They're not asked to provoke. They're not born of rebellion. They come from curiosity, the same trait that drives discovery in science, breakthroughs in medicine, and insights in philosophy. But in many religious environments, especially those rooted in dogma, these questions aren't welcomed. They're deflected, dismissed, sometimes even punished. The message is subtle but clear. You can think deeply, just not here. This dissonance plants a seed. Because intelligent minds don't just accept answers, they trace them to their source. And when that source is, because we said so, the structure starts to wobble. The very traits that make someone excel in school or research, curiosity, skepticism, pattern recognition, are the same traits that begin to unravel religious certainty. Over time, faith can start to feel like a house where every room is labeled, "Do not enter." And for the curious, the forbidden room is always the most compelling. Some stay silent for years, playing the role expected of them, going to services, reciting the prayers. But behind the scenes, the questions continue to grow, until one day, the silence breaks, not with confrontation, but with quiet clarity. This doesn't add up, and just like that, the departure begins, not with a bang, but with a question that was never supposed to be asked. Education's double-edged sword, the cognitive toolkit. Higher education is often blamed for shaking religious belief, but it's not the professors, it's not the textbooks, it's the tools. Critical thinking, logical reasoning, evidence-based inquiry, historical analysis, and perhaps most importantly, the courage to say, "I don't know, yet. Ask you." These tools don't just fill the mind with facts, they change how the mind works. For someone who's spent years sharpening these tools, through science, literature, philosophy, religious claims start to look different. Not evil, not even necessarily harmful, just unsupported. A belief might sound profound, but when you strip away the poetry and ask, "What's the evidence?" it often collapses. Take epistemology, the study of how we know what we know. In science, knowledge is always provisional, always open to revision. In religion, knowledge is often declared eternal, not to be questioned. And that's the conflict. The academic toolkit isn't designed to protect belief. It's designed to test it, to stress test every assumption until what remains is solid. This is not an attack, it's a refinement. It's not about arrogance, it's about accountability. If we demand evidence for medicine, for policy, for history, why should faith get a pass? The more someone learns to think this way, the harder it becomes to compartmentalize. You can't be a skeptic in the lab and a believer in the pew, not for long. Eventually, the questions catch up. And when they do, it's not a crisis, it's clarity. Not a rejection of meaning, but a realization that meaning doesn't have to come from mythology. Historical deconstruction, the sacred texts unveiled. For many, the first real crack in religious belief doesn't come from science. It comes from history. Not the kind you find in sermons, but the kind you encounter in a university classroom, where sacred texts are studied not as divine revelations, but as human documents. It's called historical critical analysis, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. You begin to realize that the Bible, the Quran, the Torah, they weren't written all at once. They weren't dictated by a single divine voice. They were assembled, edited, translated, contradicted. Take the book of Genesis. 2 creation stories, back to back. One says humans were created after animals. The other says man was made first, then animals, then woman from his rib. This isn't divine mystery, it's editorial evidence, the fossilized remnants of 2 separate traditions woven together. Or consider the Exodus, the grand escape from Egypt, the foundation of Jewish identity. Archaeologists have searched for decades. There's no trace, no evidence of millions of Hebrew slaves, no record of plagues, no sign of 40 years of wandering. These stories may be powerful, but they're not history, they're mythology. And the Gospels? Not eyewitness accounts. Written decades after Jesus' death by anonymous Greek-speaking authors who copied from each other, and from now lost source documents. They contradict each other on core details, from the resurrection to Jesus' last words. These aren't mistakes, they're the fingerprints of legend in progress. To someone trained in history, this isn't blasphemy, it's just how old stories evolve. And once you realize these texts were crafted, not delivered, compiled, not dictated, the divine authority begins to fade. The book you once saw as perfect truth becomes something else entirely, a window into the fears, hopes, and politics of the people who wrote it. Still meaningful perhaps, but no longer unquestionable. Morality without myth, the ethics gap. One of the most persistent claims in defense of religion is this: without God, there can be no morality. No commandments, no consequences, no compass, no direction, just chaos. But intelligent people who examine that claim often find the opposite to be true. They don't leave religion because they've lost their sense of right and wrong. They leave because it conflicts with it. Because the more you actually read the sacred texts, not just the comforting verses, but all of it, the more you're forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. The moral foundation isn't solid, it's cracked, and in some places, it's rotten. In the Old Testament, genocide is commanded. Slavery is condoned. Women are treated as property. Children are stoned for disobedience. Entire cities are burned for worshiping the wrong God. In the New Testament, things improve, but not enough. Hell becomes the new threat. Slavery is still tolerated, and verses have been used for centuries to justify misogyny and anti-Semitism. The Quran offers beauty and peace, but also verses that justify violence against unbelievers. This isn't cherry-picking, it's reading the whole orchard. And for many intelligent, empathetic people, these commands don't sit right. They don't inspire reverence, they provoke revulsion. The dilemma was described over 2,000 years ago by Plato. Do the gods love what is good, or is it good because the gods love it? Because if morality depends solely on divine command, then anything can be called good, even cruelty. But if goodness exists independently, if compassion, justice, and empathy stand on their own, then we don't need a God to define them. And here's the deeper truth. Most people, religious or not, don't get their morality from Scripture. They bring it to Scripture. They decide which parts to emphasize and which to ignore. But for someone who values reason, empathy, and human rights, the selective reading becomes harder to justify. They begin to trust their own moral compass, not out of pride, but out of consistency. Because when a book says, love thy neighbor on one page, and stone the outsider on the next, it's no longer a guide, it's a test. And passing that test sometimes means walking away. Psychology of belief. Why the brain is wired for God. If religion isn't grounded in historical fact, if its moral code is flawed and its claims unfalsifiable, why do so many people still believe? The answer isn't just in the heavens, it's in the brain. Modern psychology and cognitive science reveal something remarkable and humbling. We are not logic machines, we are belief machines. Our brains are evolution's way of helping us survive, not necessarily helping us see the truth. And for early humans, belief was a survival tool. When you hear a rustle in the grass, your brain faces a choice. It's the wind, or it's a predator. Assuming it's a predator, even when it's not, increases your odds of survival. And so we evolved with what scientists call hyperactive agency detection. The tendency to assume someone or something is behind every event. A shadow becomes a spirit. A storm becomes divine anger. A coincidence becomes a miracle. We see intention everywhere, even where there is none. And religion gives those instincts a name, a story, and a system. But that's not all. We also crave meaning. We want to believe that everything happens for a reason, that we are not accidents of biology, but the center of a plan, that every suffering, every joy, every coincidence is a part of something greater. That's comforting, but comfort doesn't make it true. Then there's confirmation bias, our tendency to notice evidence that supports what we already believe and ignore what doesn't. A prayer answered becomes proof. 1,000 unanswered prayers are forgotten. And communal reinforcement, the power of belonging. When everyone around you believes the same thing, questioning isn't just difficult, it's dangerous. It threatens your place in the group. It makes you an outsider. But intelligent people, especially those trained in psychology, begin to notice the pattern. They see belief not as a sign of spiritual truth, but as a psychological trick, a well-designed illusion. And once you know how the illusion works, it loses its power. You can still feel awe, still feel peace, still feel connected to something greater, but you no longer need to assign it a name, a book, or a deity. You've seen behind the curtain, and you realize it wasn't God pulling the strings, it was your own mind, emotional intelligence, and the cost of belonging. Not every departure from religion is loud. In fact, most aren't. There's no dramatic debate, no angry post, no final goodbye. Just a quiet shift, a growing silence, and eventually, absence. Because for many intelligent people, leaving religion isn't just an intellectual decision, it's an emotional one, and a deeply costly one. They're not leaving to be rebellious, they're leaving to be honest, to stop pretending. But honesty comes with a price. For some, it means disappointing their parents, losing community, watching lifelong friendships drift away. And that's why many walk slowly, quietly, carefully. They're not weak, they're not cowards. They're emotionally intelligent enough to understand the impact of their choices. They weigh it all, truth versus peace, authenticity versus acceptance. And they decide, sometimes silently, it's time to go. Not because they're angry at God, but because they no longer believe He's there. Not because they want to destroy faith, but because their faith is already gone, and pretending otherwise feels like a betrayal of themselves. So they leave the choir, they stop going through the motions, they stop explaining, they just go. They find meaning in quieter places, in books, in nature, in relationships, in acts of kindness. They rebuild their identity, not around what they reject, but around what they quietly embrace. This is the side of deconversion no one talks about. The ache, the grace, the quiet strength it takes to walk away, not with bitterness, but with peace, the silent migration, from faith to freedom. What we're witnessing today isn't a war on religion. It's not a movement of angry atheists tearing down cathedrals or mocking belief. It's something quieter, more personal, more profound. It's a migration. One by one, in coffee shops, college dorms, late-night walks, and quiet moments alone, people are stepping away from faith. Not to rebel, but to breathe. They've realized that meaning doesn't require myth, that morality doesn't need commandments carved in stone, that wonder and awe belong not to religion, but to reality itself. They're not replacing church with chaos. They're replacing dogma with discovery, replacing ritual with reflection, replacing obedience with understanding. This isn't about superiority, it's about sincerity. About no longer saying prayers they don't believe, no longer defending contradictions they can't explain, no longer ignoring the discomfort that's been whispering for years. You've outgrown this. Some turn to science, some to philosophy, some simply embrace the questions. But what unites them is not what they reject, it's what they're moving toward. Clarity, integrity, a worldview that doesn't require compartmentalization or fear. This migration is not loud, but it is growing, and once you see it, you recognize it everywhere. Not in arguments, but in absences, not in protests, but in quiet changes. In the person who used to lead prayer, but now listens in silence. In the once devout friend who now finds beauty in uncertainty. In the calm, steady gaze of someone who no longer needs to be watched over because they've learned how to think for themselves. This isn't the end of their journey. It's the beginning of a freer one. The path out of religion isn't always sudden. More often, it's a slow climb. One question at a time. One crack in the foundation. One shift in perspective. And when you finally reach the summit, when you've laid down the fear, the guilt, the need to pretend, you don't find emptiness. You find space, breath, perspective. You begin to see a world that doesn't need a creator to be miraculous, a morality that doesn't require fear to be meaningful, a life that doesn't need to be eternal to be precious. You realize that this one fragile, finite existence is enough. That being kind matters more than being correct. That doubt is not a weakness, but a mark of intellectual honesty. And that walking away isn't the end of anything. It's the start of a life lived on your own terms. So, if you felt the questions rising inside you, if you felt the quiet pull away from belief, know this: you are not alone. You're part of a growing, thinking, feeling community of people who have chosen truth over tradition, integrity over certainty, and meaning over mythology. This is the world we explore here. A world of awe without superstition, of purpose without dogma, of human connection, curiosity, and compassion, without needing a God to approve of it. If that resonates with you, you've found your people. Subscribe, click the bell, and join us for more honest, human conversations. And if you're ready, share your story in the comments. What was the question that first opened the door for you? What chapter spoke to your own quiet shift? We read them all, because this isn't just content, it's a community. Thank you for thinking with us today.